we're creating intelligence as a service, right? That's one way I talk about AI. Is like, yes, there's all sentience and blah, blah, blah. Like we can talk about that stuff forever. But at a very tactical level, we had software as a service. We now have intelligence as a service, right? And the implications of that for your business in terms of what you can go do is just crazy profound. You can start doing the impossible. You can dream bigger, which is so fun. So fun as an organization.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this, our latest episode of The Conscious Capitalists, with myself, Timothy Henry, and my partner, making the world a better place through business, Raj Sisodia. Hey there, Raj.
Hey, Timothy. Buenos dias from Mexico City. It's a warm, sunny day here.
Warm, sunny day in Mexico City, and here I am in Washington, D.C. We're connecting capital to capital. And today we have Victor Cho with us. And Victor is a longtime member of the Conscious Capitalist community. And as I read his bio, we go over his bio, I think the bio itself says something about who Victor is. And I think that'll be an important part of our dialogue today. So let me introduce Victor. He's a CEO, advisor, and board member with a deep passion for building online customer experiences. And he actually puts a number beside that saying, when he builds good customer experiences, they end up with a net promoter score of 80 plus. He does this with a leadership ethos grounded in transparency, empathy, diversity, and integrity. The building blocks that he uses to deploy from his toolkit are use of analytics and data. And we're going to talk a little bit about Victor's deep dive into AI, which will be an important part of our discussion today. He uses leveraged networking business model dynamics, creating organizations with recursive leadership engines. Finally, he has a deep belief that companies need to solve not just for 3, but for 4 stakeholders. Beyond just employees, customers, and shareholders, he believes that there is a 4th stakeholder that we need to pay a lot of attention to, and that is society. And that is probably where we will kick off this discussion. So, Victor, tell us a little bit about what got you to this philosophy, which you clearly articulate as the 4th stakeholder.
Timothy, Raj, such a pleasure, such a treat to be on your program. And yeah, some quick background. I never was exposed to this idea. It really evolved over the course of my career. When I started early in my days at Microsoft, which was my first job out of college, I was exposed to a company that really had 2 stakeholders primary. Microsoft at that time was really focused on the shareholder clearly, and also on employees. They built an incredible employee experience. They were less customer centric back then, which is kind of funny. I didn't get my customer centricity till I did one of my next roles at Intuit, which is renowned in the Silicon Valley for being customer centric, one of the early users of Net Promoter. So, long story short, I kind of picked these up over time, and for the longest time ran in a 3 stakeholder mindset. I thought that was kind of how the world operated. Yeah, hey, customers, employees, shareholders, you're good to go. I'd say in the last 15 years, it became clear to me that there was a broader responsibility for the business. And I think that came from seeing all of the external pressures as a CEO. So I took my first CEO role in 2008. And as a CEO, you get all of these pressures, right, that move outside of those boundaries, right? And it was very clear to me, no, you've got another stakeholder in business, which is just the broader community and ecosystem and society in which you operate. And that stakeholder needs to be operationalized.
And I'm wondering, what was that moment as a CEO when you had the realization that there is this other stakeholder that I need to be paying attention to? Was there a moment in time where you had an epiphany?
Yeah, I think the epiphany came in 2 stages. So I think it kind of bubbled in the back of my mind as a CEO, right? There were all these other issues that I was thinking about in terms of like, hey, what's the nature of my business? What's the purpose of the business, right? Are we doing as much good as we can? Are employees donating? So it was always this kind of cloud of, hey, how are you operating? But what really crystallized for me, this was in 2020, around 2022, where I took some time off. What struck me was that there is no operational playbook to deal with society and the long tail of issues. And I'm a huge framework person. As you mentioned, I use Net Promoter. I've always used Net Promoter as one of the awesome frameworks for customer management, for customer stakeholder management, and there are a lot of similarities, right? Your customers have a huge tail of issues that they care about. And the beauty of Net Promoter, for those that aren't familiar, it's a very simple metric where you ask, would you recommend this product or this service to someone else on a scale of 1 to 10? And then you ask them why or why not. And it's the open ended dialogue that really gets you to the most important issues, right? That are driving either what's called detraction, you're making your customers unhappy, or delight, making your customers happy. The long tail of societal issues to me was very similar. It's like there's I forget, 100 UN goals, right? There are so many things your company could do. And what struck me as an operator is, well, you can't do all those things. So what's the equivalent of that promoter for your societal stakeholder? So that got me down this concept of, well, the problem is no one has been talking about society as a stakeholder, because the minute you do that, there's a bunch of stuff that kicks in, right? There's reporting, there's transparency, there's metrics, there's processes, and you have those for all your other stakeholders. So that was kind of I guess a slow epiphany, but it led me to this idea of let's at least codify that playbook and make it operational.
So, Victor, we have talked about society as a stakeholder in conscious capitalism. When I wrote Firms of Endearment, I used the acronym SPICE for the stakeholders: society, partners, investors, customers, and employees. And then we added spicy to make it the environment as well, separating that from society. But I think what you're doing is bringing a level of rigor to it and bringing a level of analytics to it. So I'd love to get into that. I know you've written a series of articles around this. So if you can just walk us through your thinking process and how can we make this more tangible rather than somewhat lip service.
The core of the framework, and these are all online in a series of articles, as you mentioned, Raj. They sub break down into four elements that are kind of the engine. What's the operational engine of what this might look like? And we'll maybe start at a high level, and we can peel the onion. So the first one, and they're all very simple when you peel it at the high level. So if you think of your business and its broader impact, the first question is, are you doing the maximum good that you can as an ecosystem, as an engine? And that's not just things like, are you taking a percentage of your profits and donating it, which is great. It's a great thing to do. But my core message, and there's a bunch of articles here, are no, if you think about your business much more creatively, there are way bigger levers that you can actually bring to bear, because the actual engine itself can create value. So a very simple example that I mentioned, and actually, yeah, I shared with the Conscious Capitalism audience a couple of years ago, is Evite. So I was CEO at Evite, a large party site invitation service, and we have a huge flow of parties coming through. Right, our core business, I would argue, is doing good in the world, is helping bring people together and throw parties. So it's like, yay! But there was a moment in time where we realized, wow, there's so many people buying gifts for parties. Like if we were to actually integrate donations into that flow, what would that do? And so we did that. We basically said, hey, let's add a donation button as an option on every single invitation for every single party. And it puts it top of mind, right? It's like, hey, maybe I don't need that 40th present for my kid, right? Maybe this can be a moment where we turn this party into some social good. And that simple button, right, which is just part of the flow of the ecosystem, has now raised probably $40 million for nonprofits across mainly the US, because Evite's predominantly US based. Now, as a fraction of Evite's revenue, it's an insane amount. It'd be like Apple suddenly saying like, "Oh yeah, we've just raised $300 billion for nonprofits," or something like something in that vein. So, yeah, to me that was a great example where we actually, as a business ecosystem, would never have been able to deliver that much value off of our profit stream, right? But just by being creative about the nature of the business and how it's what our experience flows are, we were able to deliver like huge amount. So there's do more good is kind of bucket one. There's a second bucket, which is do less bad, which of course seems very basic, but I think the core issue there is this idea of splitting between your first and second order impacts as a business. So most businesses will focus on what's the thing they can immediately see, which is good. Yes, you got to focus on those things. The one that most companies miss, and there's a lot of energy in this second area, are the second order impacts, right? What if you're a Facebook and the downstream impact of creating social networking in the society is in fact increasing depression and mental illness? Like, what are you doing about it? And so I've got a whole set of articles on how to deal with that thorny problem. And then the third and the fourth are very simple. They're about operationalizing, right? How do you prioritize? How do you figure out all? Because there's a lot of stuff. Once you do those two things, you've probably got 100 things that you could go do. So now, how do you operationalize that and decide what to go do? The very last bucket is how do you then make that transparent with the society? You're transparent with every other stakeholder. Like you as a business in my mind should be saying, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what we're not doing. This is the reason why. So it's those four buckets.
I love it. And I think one of the questions that always comes up within the context of conscious capitalism is the time frame that you're looking at these things through. And when you start to talk about the society as a stakeholder here, um, how do you manage that time frame in terms of, as a CEO, you've got pressure this quarter, this year, got to hit these numbers, and you're looking over the horizon. How am I creating value over the next 2 or 3 years? How, in your experience, did that come up? How did that show up? That kind of tension, and how did you manage it?
Yeah, so to me, it comes down in some ways to that third aspect of this operational frame, which is how do you prioritize and what things are you prioritizing and what's the time frame? Um, and I think there's no hard answer or hard line on that. That really does become a judgment call, which is when you put the spectrum of what can you do to drive more positive impact, like what are your second order impacts? Are you fixing those? And you put that on a matrix of a pretty simple one of like, well, how many people are you impacting and how severe is that impact? Right? You end up, I think, with a reasonably clear set of quadrants, and it's like, okay, well, we got to go fix this first one because it's the biggest impact, right? It's the most impact, and if that takes 1 year or 5 years, in my mind, it's time frame is actually not built in. So playing back on the social networking angle, right? I would argue almost all of the social networking companies are dealing with their first order thing to go solve is this idea of is the fundamental nature of my business creating downstream harm? And they absolutely need to understand that as a collective. They need to start solving for it. There's so many steps they haven't taken, and you know all of the other stuff that they might be doing to go do some good societal thing. I would argue they should. This is the controversial piece. I'm like, I don't know that they should do those things. So to put another way, I'm incredibly concerned about global warming. But put another way, if Facebook is going to go spend $1 billion to make their servers green, or they could spend $1 billion to go fundamentally understand is what is the danger of social networking and how do we fix it? I'd rather have those dollars decked against the first, right? Because it is the higher order problem, at least in my mind. And all these big companies they're just doing so much, and so it's a lot of smaller things, but potentially neglecting the big elephant in the room.
The normal language for these kinds of things that companies use and economists use is externalities, right? That we do our business, and then in the process, yeah, there's some downstream, upstream negative effects, and we conveniently dismiss them as externalities, and we don't need to worry about them. Of course, in conscious capitalism, we say we need to actually deal with those and convert them from negative to positive externalities. As we say, there are no side effects. We do things, and there are effects, and all the effects matter. And what I love about what you're doing is you're systematically looking at all of those effects and saying, how can we make them positive? Now, is this a framework that is so far conceptual, or is it something that you've been applying at Evite and even in your new company?
Yeah, no, it's both a conceptual frame, but again, meant to be an operational frame. So no, absolutely at Evite. I didn't actually have it codified in as much clarity, but I kind of go through in the articles. Yeah, we pretty much did all of those things, including things like thinking about, it's funny. I remember some conversations early on of, okay, what happens in the limit of, this is one way to actually think about your externalities, or what people used to think of their externalities is what happens at the limit of your business in terms of the world. Like, is that a good place or a bad place? And yeah, for Evite, yeah, we have a funny example, which is like, okay, if everyone's throwing more parties and coming together and celebrating life's precious moments, like, what's the worst thing that could maybe happen? We're like, okay, maybe there's some subsegment that's drinking too much that we need to go deal with. But in general, people should be getting together more face to face, right? And that made us feel good about the purpose of the business.
Yeah, and I love this discussion about externalities. And, you know, from your perspective, Victor, because I know you're into data and analytics, it seems to me that one of the big challenges and or opportunities around externalities is the ability to have good metrics on these things, the ability to be able to actually start to measure these things. So, the most obvious example is carbon and carbon footprints, and then being able to, be able to actually have accurate measures of what that looks like, and like you say, at different levels, all the way down your supply chain. Now, increasingly in the carbon world, we're able to do that. We have satellites that are able to record, with quite high degrees of precision and accuracy, these things. But, some things it becomes more challenging. And, some people would say if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I'm curious that when we start getting into this issue of society as a stakeholder, how do you respond around, good, solid, repeatable metrics, and then providing transparency around those?
It's a great question, and I'll weave back to the social networking world because it's just such an easy one, and it's just such a clear set of next steps in my mind that should be taken related to data. So, what thought, Raj? Going back to the thought on externalities, like one big problem with bringing your externalities internal is there are often times, in fact, many times, where you're just a single element of a broader problem. So I'll take this again, social networking, Facebook or Snapchat or any of these folks can easily say, hey, maybe there's a problem, but I'm just one of 10 companies, right? And so it's beyond me, right? This is a bigger problem than me. And I've heard that language come out of these companies, which is, in my mind, a complete cop out, right? It's a complete cop out because what's the right thing that should be done? And it relates to data, Timothy. The right thing should be, sounds so simple, companies should work together, right? So the social networking companies should be coming together and saying like, hey guys, we think we have a problem. We need to get together and let's create it. I'll if I were the magic king of all social networking, right? This is what I would clearly what I would do. I would say, hey, all social networking companies, we need your data. And don't worry, we're going to pull this into a neutral third party. No one's going to get access to that data. It's going to be the Fort Knox of data, but we need all of your usage data because what we need to do is some real research at the macro level around teen depression and suicide and mental health, right? We need to actually do the science to understand what is the impact. And you as a collective, you guys are going to agree that whatever we find, you're going to start fixing, right? Because it's going to be data and it's going to be complete. And the only way it gets solved potentially is for all of you guys to take the right steps, right? So this idea of companies coming together to solve problems is also not for some reason, not in our DNA as a society, right? I was trying to come up with examples as I was coming up with these operational frames, and I was like, well, when's the last time that happened? Well, and one example I gave, but it's all the way back from like the 50s or something like that, is the Motion Picture Association, which came together across multiple studios early on to say like, hey, wow, the content we're creating might be dangerous to our youth. Maybe we should self-enforce a rating system, right? The government didn't come and do that. They did that themselves. I'm like, yes, perfect, right? You guys as a collective can solve, or at least try to mitigate some of these things. So the data's out. The data is probably out there, right? It's just you have to be creative in terms of how you go get it.
I know that Paul Polman was, and I believe still is, trying to do something like that at the industry level through his entity called Imagine, right? He's trying to bring together all the major players in food or in fashion or apparel or retail, etc., and trying to get collective action. Because you run into that problem, right? If you're the only one doing it in your industry, then you may put yourself at some kind of competitive disadvantage. So I think, and that also then brings in the policy question. So this then brings up perhaps there are certain things that need to be regulated, certain things that perhaps we can count on self-enforcement. But have you also thought about the policy side of things, that which of the things are really not amenable to voluntary action at an individual company level?
It's funny, in a nirvana world, I don't think you'd almost ever need government intervention, right? To me, the government intervention is the stopgap because the current system, right, the current system that we've created is imperfect and doesn't create these behaviors. But going back to the whole wave of, there's going to be a wave of social networking regulation. It's already starting, right? That wouldn't have happened, I would argue, right, if the companies had gotten together and gotten ahead of the curve and said, this is what's happening, this is what we're doing. I think both the government, the consumers, I think and they were transparent about it, right? This is what we're doing. This is what we understand. I think the world would have said, awesome, you guys are being what I call business citizens in the world, right? You're actually operating with that multi-stakeholder lens.
Well, that sort of sets us up in a way to start transferring over to AI discussion in the sense that there's a ton of discussion going on. How are we going to manage the future of AI? And, it's an international problem, and you have the Chinese in one corner, the Americans in the other, the Europeans evolving in their sets of things. Um, and I'm curious, Victor, when you do get into an international thing like this, how do you even begin to think about something like managing or self-managing AI?
It's funny. The primary reason I am now kind of co-founder and CEO of an AI company is to ensure that this idea of social responsibility, being a business citizen, right, works in this new space. So in some ways, it's this really great test case for, hey, is the operational framework of what I came up with, does it continue to work in what is arguably going to be one of the most aggressive changes in the society, and also one of the ones where I think we have the most risk of companies having some bad first and second order impacts, right? It on both frames, like AI can create some of the most positive impacts in the world, and if the businesses don't manage it well, it can create some of the worst downstream impacts. And so, it's actually funny when I always like to think very far ahead. When I actually was creating the frame, I had two industries in mind as my kind of mental model case study. One was the social networking sites, and one was the new world of AI that was formulating. So high level, no, I think the frame actually applies equally well. It's abstracted at a high enough level that any AI company could use it. But no, this is going to be, I would argue, the largest change in company configurations, processes, behaviors that we've ever seen.
Hello, everyone. Just a quick reminder that this episode is sponsored by the 2024 Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit. Are you ready to transform your business into a powerful force for good while connecting with world-class leaders shaping the future of business? Then you need to be at the 2024 CEO Summit. It's happening in October in Austin, and the CEO Summit is an exclusive invite-only experience for conscious leaders ready to claim their seat at the table. To request an invite or to nominate a peer, head to ceosummit.consciouscapitalism.org. That's ceosummit.consciouscapitalism.org, or check the episode show notes. Look forward to seeing you in October in Austin. So as we get into this whole discussion of conscious capitalism and AI, what's your perspective? Because I could argue that actually the most human companies are the ones that are actually going to benefit or be more willing to take risks and experiment with AI. And I'm curious, how do you approach this whole idea of companies experimenting and using AI and finding new ways in which they can do business and new business models? What's your frame for even beginning to think about that as a business?
I have a whole separate set of frameworks for the business impact of AI. I'll give you the shortcut end cap of it, which is there's four big ways I think any business should be thinking about AI, right, in the context of how they operate. And this is separate from this idea of the fourth stakeholder frame. So that still holds, right? Like AI's ability for you to do more good with your ecosystem. Like how can you do that? And AI's, to the extent you're incorporating it or building it, like what are your downstream harms, right? Those all still apply. But from your business model perspective, in terms of how you operate your business, which is a separate question, AI can do some amazing things. So on one hand, and there's four big ones. So on one hand, it can of course make things that you do today better. Like it can improve your existing products and services because there are now things that probably were not possible for you to go attack, or new insights that you can glean. Whatever it is, right? Your product as it exists can get better. And of course, companies should pursue all those, right? They should make their services. They should get higher net promoters, right? Build better experiences. They can massively reduce costs, right? There's no question, and I'm running a startup now, right? The startup cost structure in a world of AI is a fraction of what it was 2 years ago, at least in the technology space. I would argue in many spaces, right? Every single day we run into something where I'm like, oh yeah, we should go, we should go do that legal work, and that's probably $5,000, and our first thought is, well, do do we need to do that? Like, can we get Chat GPT to spit out a first draft contract that we then modify? Because we're always modifying our first drafts with our lawyers, and then can we then pass that over to lawyers for the final sanity pass, right? And get a contract for $300 versus $3,000? And the short answer is yeah, you can. It's actually quite amazing, right? But every single function in the business, right, can be enhanced. So costs go down, speed to market goes way up. So those things should absolutely be pursued. But the last one that makes me most excited is this idea of what's been impossible is now actually possible, and that's the biggest jump for companies to go through. Is where we're creating intelligence as a service, right? That's one way I talk about AI. Is like, yes, there's all sentience and blah blah blah. Like, we talk about that stuff forever, but at a very tactical level, we had software as a service. We now have intelligence as a service, right? And the implications of that for your business in terms of what you can go do is just crazy profound. So yeah, you can start doing the impossible. You can dream bigger, which is so fun. So fun as an organization.
So let's pull that string a little bit more. Creativity or intelligence as a service. Victor, that's a great little pithy line. Now, go a little deeper with us. Like what is that at the next order of meaning? What does that mean? You're an accounting firm, and Victor comes along and says, "Hey, accounting firm, creativity and intelligence as a service."
Sure. Maybe I'll use the Emovid example because it's kind of it's one of the things that made the business I'm running now possible. So 2 seconds of background. Emovid, which is the current company that I'm the co-founder of, is asynchronous video in business. So we're doing, we're recording this podcast, and we're on a kind of a Zoom equivalent that you guys can't see, of course, but we can see each other because there's value, right, in the facial expression and the tone. We can just have a much more robust conversation. There's a huge missing hole in business, which is the use of video asynchronously, right? Think of video chat, video correspondence in business, which also has all of the amazing benefit of you sending out your tone, emotion, and expression. That's not a big thing in the world, right? Business still operates primarily on email. And so we're bringing that platform to bear. Now, where does AI come into play on that? Because you could argue, well, you could have done that 10 years ago. And we could have as a society, and we actually tried, but it didn't work, right? The companies that all did that failed. And here's one super simple tactical example of what was impossible a year and a half ago that makes it possible for this product to exist. I can now summarize the contents of a video and tell you what that video is about. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that a year and a half ago, right? If you said, oh, and literally this is how this product would have evolved 2 years ago if you actually went and talked to your customers. Oh, would you like to get a video message from Raj as opposed to, right, an email? It's like, and then I have to watch it. And I was like, yeah, then you kind of need to watch it and it's like, well, that might be slower. What if I'm on the go? What if I'm at the airport and I don't have audio? So it's like, no, I think I need to be able to understand what it says. So the simple idea of, oh, well, we can tell you what this says. No software developer on the planet could have made that algorithm before AI. And it's necessary to crack open the behaviors.
So when you're talking to a series of conscious capitalism CEOs right now, and what are the one or two things that you really want to emphasize with them in terms of looking at AI as an opportunity?
Maybe the sound bites would be like, one, you absolutely should be looking at it. And I would recommend using that quadrant because it's so expansive, right? It's a little bit overwhelming, but when you break it down into these things of like, can we run faster, right? Can we run cheaper? Can we make the product better? Can we do something impossible, right? That wasn't possible before. I could really think that. So I would run through that frame in terms of like, where do you want to go start thinking about even applying this technology? And then the second big one is, have you thought through the second order impacts of what that's going to go do? Like maybe you can go do that, but do you want to go do that? Right? Do you want to go do that? Is that something that's good in the limit? There's a great example. There's a bunch of dating sites that I just saw press on this the other week, and I kind of shook my head. I was like, no, why are we doing this? But the pitch was, oh, guess what? In your dating site now, you don't have to talk to anybody even before you make the date. We're gonna have like an AI bot look for profiles for you, and it's gonna have a conversation with an AI bot of the other person's profile, and they're gonna tell you who to date. And I'm like, okay, okay. I was like, I could see that you can pitch that as an efficiency play for somebody. It's like, oh, I don't have to look through all these profiles. But I'm like, think about the limit. Is the limit is it a good world where like everyone on the planet has suddenly matched algorithmically by computers? Like, is that a good place? And maybe they've done that and they think that's a better place because we're horrible at making decisions. I think that's a horrible place because I think yes, there is magic that happens when you come together and meet somebody that an algorithm is not going to get. Maybe someday that could be a more efficient, but yeah, think about the doubt. Think about the limit.
It's interesting with AI. You can ask AI, what can we do with AI, right? So I went to Claude, which is the equivalent of ChatGPT, which I'm really liking. And I said, okay, how can AI spread conscious capitalism and these ideas, the awareness of it and the practice of it? And it came up with 5 things. So one is to enable conscious investing, better screening of companies for alignment with the tenets of conscious capitalism. The second is to facilitate deeper stakeholder engagement using AI chatbots and sentiment analysis tools. The third is to optimize for multi-stakeholder value creation using machine learning models to help identify win-win solutions that create shared value. And then spreading awareness and best practices more rapidly. So using AI curated content platforms and recommendation engines. And then finally, some of what you've been talking about, fostering greater transparency and accountability. So I think the potential is tremendous on both sides, right? An unconscious company can use this technology to double down on their way of doing things, and that'll create, focusing purely on cost and efficiency and so forth. But that could create more harm more rapidly. But conscious companies can likewise use it to amplify on the positive side. It's almost a race between those. I think these are two of the most powerful ideas, capitalism and AI. Now, how do they come together with higher consciousness? I think is the challenge and the opportunity.
Yeah, that's those answers are not bad, right?
I know, it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And building off that, Raj, when I said at the beginning, I said, that I think the companies that are more human are going to have an advantage here. What I was referring to is, for many people, AI is seen as sort of kind of a scary thing. It's going to potentially take away jobs. It's potentially going to threaten the livelihoods of certain types of people, and it's going to force them to change and do things differently. And, people are uncomfortable with that. Now, let's assume that there's also lots of opportunity, as Victor, you've described. Now, you take two organizations. One organization's got a high level of trust and a high level of engagement. Another organization's got a low level of trust and a low level of engagement. Who do you think is going to do a better job experimenting with this tool called AI? So to your point, Raj, in an unconscious company where it is ruled by fear and other things, what degree are people going to take risks to try new things and push the boundaries of what's possible with this brand new tool? And therefore, the organizations that probably have a bit of a competitive advantage are exactly conscious businesses, because they do have these conscious cultures where they do have higher degrees of trust and engagement. And, so that's my hypothesis. Victor, push me on that one. How do you see that?
I don't think I have a point of view on whether the conscious or unconscious would be more or less likely. I feel like some of the unconscious businesses, I mean, they're going to gravitate aggressively towards some of these things in a much more narrow stakeholder view. So the obvious one is customer support and service, which I don't I think this is a trend that is unfortunately inevitable, which is that entire industry segment. Like there's early signals that by introducing AI into those flows, you could basically support the same number of customers at better quality for your customer shareholder or stakeholder, but with 70% fewer reps. So this is now an exact example of a stakeholder trade-off that a business has to make, which is, do I want to improve my customer experience, actually improve it, improve my shareholder results at the detriment of 70% of the employees in that call center. I think that equation is always going to lose for the employee side. Right? I think almost every business is going to go bolster up those other two stakeholders, and it's probably the right macro answer. Right? As a CEO, again, you're making those hard trade-offs. Like, God, that's a hard trade-off, but it's probably going to get made for customer and shareholder. But that's one example where every customer on the planet, even those that are not stakeholder balanced, will go aggressively towards those shareholder savings. All right, for sure.
And I think that is something that's has been true historically, right? I mean, if you look at the Industrial Revolution, the first Industrial Revolution, later revolutions, we've always had massive displacement of that kind. And ultimately, I think we have to say, listen, if a machine can do something better and faster and cheaper than a human being can, then it should, because human beings should be doing things that human beings can. We have a lot of terrible jobs in this world, right, which are mindless and repetitive, and they're not really tapping into what we are capable of. So that's going to force us to shed many of those jobs and figure out ways that we can create value for each other. I think that's generally unknowable before the fact. I saw one statistic that, you remember the old days, telephone calls, there used to be operators sitting there and they would actually plug in this one to this one, and that's how they connected calls. Well, if you were still using that technology today, I mean, half of America would be employed doing that job, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It does. What concerns me about it, and I totally agree with all that, Raj. What concerns me is there has never been a technology that is going to imminently, it's not there yet, but imminently will be better than, I don't know what the exact number is, 30%, 40% of the population in terms of the value add they currently give to society. Right. And in the past, all these things have been capital intensive. So, the telephone operators, it's like, okay, like to replace that, we need to run all these wires, right? It's a long cycle before those operators get blasted out. But with intelligence as a service, we are literally getting to the point now where instantaneously, right, 30 to 40%, no, not instantaneous, in the next 5 years, let's call it 5 to 10 years, like 30 to 40% might need to reskill, let's call it. That's a big enough system shock to the economic model that I don't know how that would play out. It could be great, and maybe AI helps reskill, right? But it could also be a mass, it could be like a COVID thing that takes 20 years to flow through the system, and we deal with the repercussions, right, for a long, long time. I think that's a big one. That's one huge unknown.
Yeah, I think the speed at which it's happening doesn't allow us to adjust the same way in which we perhaps have done in the past. So there's going to be certainly a period of the dislocation for a lot of people.
It is. My optimistic side is that, again, reskilling in a world before AI is very different than reskilling in a world with AI, right? You can imagine now a knowledge worker going to a job with an AI agent, on the job trainer who's literally every single minute helping them move into a new field and get proficient. Like, what does that world look like? How fast can someone move into a new world in that world? I was like, damn fast, actually, because humans are incredibly resilient. So yeah, it's a huge open question, right?
Yeah. Well, so Victor, a particular angle on this for me is looking at conscious leaders and sort of saying, how does the role of a leader start to shift in your mind in a world where we're moving into AI? There's both sort of how does leadership change?
Yeah, on one hand, I think my answer would be it doesn't really change. I don't think, because this, I'll take the CEO role, right? As a CEO of a business, again, as long as you've taken that first jump and into the world of conscious capitalism, into the world of multi-stakeholder balance, right? Yes, there's a new variable that's now going to maybe shift some stuff around, but at the highest level, you're still, right, creating optimal outcomes for four different stakeholders, right? And you're doing that balance, and maybe that becomes a little bit more complex, but that's still your job to orchestrate, right? Kind of the entity, create value for as many stakeholders as possible, make the hard trade-off. So on one hand, I don't think it changes that much. I think the nature of those trade-offs, as we've talked about here, right, will become more interesting, maybe more aggressive. Like, do I reduce 80% of my call center to save money, right? That's a question that a large number of CEOs on the planet are about to make if they haven't already made it, right? So that's definitely coming.
One thing that before we end, I want to make sure we emphasize, because this is a stakeholder that is often neglected or becomes invisible to many companies, which is suppliers. Partners in general, but suppliers specifically. And even a company like Whole Foods, the suppliers were not in their declaration of interdependence, until about 10 years ago. And they pointed out, that's a huge thing for a retailer not to think of their suppliers as stakeholders. So I do think, these four that you have identified, and I'm assuming the environment is included within your definition of society. But I think suppliers are a very, very important stakeholder in many industries. They create 80% of the value that is sold to the end user customer is actually received from suppliers. And it is a source of competitive advantage if you have stronger supplier.
And I think, Raj, that's even going to be, as we look into a lot of these environmental measures that are coming up, and you're starting to look at your level 3 impact of the environment, you're having to look deep into your supply chain to not only look at opportunities for value creation, but also look at where are you vulnerable, because there are big issues in terms of what energy is being used, how it's being used, the footprint that's being created further down your supply chain. We're going to see a lot more emphasis on that in the next 3 to 5 years, because the data is now going to become increasingly available through things like AI and the ability to analyze quickly. What does that supply chain look like for you, and how is it operating? And there's things that we haven't seen before that we will now start to have visibility into, and are going to create real interesting questions for leaders in terms of, our suppliers and our supply chain.
No, for sure. The only other thought, I guess that maybe this is a slight change to leadership at a higher level, which is there are some new principles that are bubbling that I think executives and CEOs are going to kind of need to take a stand on or have a position on relative to AI, right? And two big ones that I talk about a lot are these kind of these double A's of authenticity and agency, right? That there are businesses now that are going to get created, and they will potentially start to remove what I call human agency, right? Are they amplifying humans, right? Are they making us better at what we do, or is the nature of what they do to replace humans, right? That's going to be a bigger and bigger potential impact of a business. And authenticity is what drives Emovid, right? We're all about, hey, in this world of AI communication, which is coming, right? A lot of communication is going to move into AI, regardless of what we do. Like, how do we maintain actual emotional video correspondence with people, which is genuine? But there's a whole slew of companies that are coming through, and they have already decided that they're not on the side of authenticity. They're on the side of pure efficiency. So example of let me make a fake version of Raj talking based on a voice sample. And when you deconstruct these things, it's no, that's not Raj. That's a soulless version of Raj. He would never look like that. He would never look like that when he says those words, but they don't care. They're like, oh, no, but it's efficient.
Well, Victor, this sort of goes back to my earlier point, about trust and authenticity. I mean, they go together at some level. If I don't feel you're authentic, I don't trust it. And do I trust that communication? Yes or no? And, and then that leaves me in this world of how do you build trust in an organization? How do you build trust in a culture? Well, Victor, I want to say thank you for helping us understand a little bit more about that world of AI and some of the implications, and for the really good work you're doing around this whole idea of a fourth stakeholder and society, and really starting to create some strong frames for that. So if people want to know more about that framework and the way you approach it, how can they find out more, Victor?
Super simple. They can just, my personal website has all of my content hanging off of it. That's www.victorcho.com. And you'll find everything up there.
Thank you very much, Victor. Very stimulating conversation, and I appreciate how you're thinking at the frontiers of so many of these issues.
No, Timothy, Raj, it's been a pleasure.